all of that. Hi, yes, as Rachel greatly said, that I'm Meaghan, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in co-tutel between University College Dublin and University of Torino. I'm not talking about research today, but instead something that has been brewing in my mind for a while, which is, trying to improve communication between archaeological scientists and archaeologists. And it's specifically for paleoproteomics. I will get to that. This will be a little interactive. We'll see. At least there's not that many of us, so maybe that will help. So please pay attention. There will be like little survey things popping up. And I'm going to be upfront here. I don't have a lot of practical suggestions. Sorry, this is, as you'll see, this has been going on for a long time. But I hope that we can maybe come up with some. And so, I'll try to be fast. Okay. So briefly, who am I? As I said, I'm doing a PhD in paleoproteomics and lipids from dental calculus to understand dietary in Neolithic Ireland. I have some really great supervisors. One, if you saw earlier, popped up, but I am not talking about that today. You'll have to wait for ISPA or something, because I want to talk about that there is a communication problem between pure quotes archaeologists and archaeological scientists. And I do think this is particularly relevant for people studying ancient proteins, which I'll get to much later, and I want to have, or at least start a discussion here. This is the first thing. Let's see if I can do this. There's so many things. Why can I not? Polls. That's what I want. Yes, here we go. We're going to launch a poll, everyone. 20 seconds to answer. Do you think there's a problem? Okay, 20 seconds. Change in the last minute. Okay, 91% say yes, 9% says no. So at least we're kind of all on the same page mostly, but we'll see. So why am I talking about this? I'm going to talk about myself just a little bit, bear with. And frankly, a lot of this will be sharing a personal experience and opinions, and hopefully we can get to something at the other end. So my background is originally archaeology. I have Bachelor of Arts in Archaeology and Anthropology. And through that, I did a field school, which unsurprisingly got me field work. And so that happened in Canada during my bachelor's, but also after my master's in the UK for a year, and also random bits in my PhD, because I do still really enjoy it. But then, as I said, there's I said PhD, I meant master's. My master's then I did at the University of York in bioarchaeology, and there I started doing proteomics, and I started with dental calculus, supervised by Dr. Camilla Speller, who all of this is kind of her fault. She's the one who got me into biomolecular archaeology, and she's what has made me today. But basically from that job, from that position, I went and got a new job in the University of Copenhagen, which did start out doing extraction of dental calculus from for proteomics. That's what the job was. I show up. Also, you're doing the mass spec, which was terrifying, I will say, because I had never seen the mass spec. I didn't really understand it. I did my master's. I sent samples off to Oxford, got raw files back. It was still kind of quite a big black box to me. So I had to be the archaeologist asking the scientists in the mass spec facility the stupid questions, the things that they was of course basic to them. So I had to bit by bit figure out the science, and eventually I became a paleoproteomics technician for all the groups in Copenhagen at the Globe Institute, and then but it was a lot of hard work, and I think hopefully we don't have to do this every single time for people. Hopefully we don't have to make it like such a hard thing to figure out, and we can work on this communication. going from that, I'm not an expert on the topic that I'm talking about today. I am maybe one of the few people who have done every single step of the archaeology to paleoproteomics workflow. I do know there's a lot more archaeologists that are running Maldives, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of us that have done everything. And I'm also coming at this with the experience of about a decade in paleoproteomics, and so I have some observations that I want to share very quickly. Sorry if I'm talking so fast. But I do want to say that I'm obviously not an expert, as AI has beautifully shown me here. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to solve this today, obviously, and especially as someone who only decided on this topic a few weeks ago and is probably very naive about it, but I do want to still share opinions and hopefully we can have some discussion. So yeah, I don't think we're going to solve it. It's going to be probably more like this, but maybe together as a group, we can take this one step closer. Talking about the group, I think one thing that I really love about archaeological scientists is that we are in this weird middle ground, and it is such a fruitful place to be. But we are also still kind of the minority. So we have all the archaeologists on one side and all the quote hard scientists on the other. And it's we're still kind of like the little in between them. But one thing I also do love is that we are coming from both sides of this. So there's people who go from archaeology to the science and the science to the archaeology. And mostly just for me, let's just do a very another quick poll. What are we at? Let's do this one. Here we go. What is your background? 20 seconds. Wow. Science is winning. Okay, cool. Everyone answered. 62% science. Oh, no, not everyone answered. It lied to me. Okay, but still, about half of us are from the science side, 20% from archaeology, 20% say truly a mix. And I'm great that those kind of programs are now becoming more of a thing. So, I do want to say, why am I talking about this right now? And it's not just because I don't want to talk about my PhD. I do think it's an apropos topic. It's one of the topics coming up at the next ISBA. So integrating ancient biomarkers and archaeological theory. And maybe by having this today, we'll have some more fruitful things to talk about then. But personally, why am I talking about this now? I've actually kind of had this reverse culture shock. So I'm now back in an archaeology department. And it was weird to me when I was in the Globe Institute in Copenhagen. I felt like I was on the archaeology side. And now I'm here in the archaeology part. Now I feel like, oh, I'm one of the science sides. So it's been interesting, but it's also been super great because I'm connecting back to my archaeology roots and things I forgot. Like, oh yeah, theory exists, which I'm going to be right up front here. That was my worst class in my bachelor's. I am not very good at it. My brain doesn't work that way, but it is super important, which we are going to be talking about. And one of the things is also how physically unclose I am to other biomolecular archaeologists in Dublin. I'd say the closest is at University College Trinity. Trinity College Dublin. Oh dear, I said it wrong. Oops. Yes, which is physically not that close, and different universities. And I acknowledge this was also a problem in Copenhagen with the Globe Institute and the archaeology department being in separate locations, but still the same university. And I do know people who are working on that, and I'm sure this is a similar situation for a lot of you, but it was just like another, I'm not close to people that I have been for so long. And also recently I taught one lecture for the archaeological science module for second year archaeology students. And I did paleoproteomics in 1 hour. So I really had to think about how to communicate that. I had this now a little bit more practice trying to communicate myself to the department now and everyone I met and communicate what I do, but I had to now do it to students who maybe had never, well, lots of them had never heard of paleoproteomics at all. And also think about their background, because most of these people are archaeology background, so not necessarily any science in there. And it was actually really useful to try to remember to think about what I need to communicate, not all the other stuff that is really superfluous to understanding. But I do think this is, yeah, pretty much why I'm now thinking about it recently. So what do I think the problem is? Or maybe what I should say is, what do I think the problems are? I'm sure there are a lot more, but these kind of broad ones we can start with. So I think one of the big ones is assumptions on both sides. So between the more sciencey side and the more archaeology side. And so this is assumptions of knowledge. So what the other side knows, which is often assuming that people know more than they do, which happens. What is basic to one might not be basic to another. And also, I'd say assuming what is important. So could be like what the one side values more, what they find more interesting, but also something that will come up is that sometimes there's assumption that one side is more important than the other. And I obviously I don't think that's what we should be doing. And I think this is obviously causing communication problems because we're going to be talking in different places, which will cause miscommunications, confusions, etc. And I think one of the other main problems is that there's limited time to connect. So like I said about there being fewer integrated places physically, there's this problem where we're not getting that much time to understand the other point of view or to talk to each other and find out what's available on both sides, right? And conferences in theory could be great, but often they're very niche. So we're only have one of the sides represented. And then in big conferences like the European Archaeological Association or the American Archaeological Association, they're huge. There's like 20 sessions going on at the same time. It makes it really hard to branch out and to make these connections. And then I also think that we're putting more effort into public outreach. And don't get me wrong, public outreach is very important. I know that. But I think we should be putting just as much effort into outreach within the discipline, because that is kind of where I think the most fruitful research will be, which can then be communicated to the public. And I think that's important because the more holistic the research, the more ways we're going to like capture the public and find those things that we can connect with them. So easy things to fix, right? If you are from the more science side and never actually heard of these problems, maybe, welcome. But in the general, between the two sides, the more the humanities side and the science, this has kind of been a problem for a while. And a lot of discussions about this divide between science and humanities often start with referencing this work by Englishman Charles Percy Snow. And if you hadn't heard about it, don't feel bad. I also didn't, or probably more likely, I had heard about it, completely forgot about it. But this is a lecture he gave where he calls these two groups the two cultures. And this is just after the scientific revolution, he's calling, where there's kind of more people working in science. And so he's talking about how these two groups that are now showing up don't really understand each other. And Snow was in a good place to talk about this because he, kind of like us, was in this weird middle ground. He was both a novelist and a physical chemist. He didn't combine them like we do, which I think could have been cool, but it was still one of the loudest in talking about the friction between the two groups. There's a very famous quotation that I will not use because of time, but it's talking, look it up, it's in with the Wikipedia for this, but it's talking about how the two groups, as I was saying earlier, don't understand maybe the basic concepts of the other. So he compared knowing the second law of thermodynamics to reading Shakespeare and that kind of stuff. These kind of two in his mind, basic levels that were like equivalent, but really smart people on both sides not knowing, which is completely fair because that's not your training. But then we go into archaeology, and sorry to bring up theory, trigger warning. Sorry, I had to, even with the time. But of course, from this scientific revolution in the 50s that Snow was talking about, we can see this coming into archaeology quite quickly. So processual archaeology, emerging in the 1960s, was focusing on applying scientific methods to understand past human behavior. So this is emphasizing environmental factors, scientific analysis, and even that we want to stay away from cultural evolution and that kind of stuff. So of course, we swing one way, we have to swing the other. And there's a reaction to this in the 1980s, creatively called post-processual archaeology, which challenged this deterministic arguments from processual archaeology and emphasized the role of individuals, social meaning, and subjective interpretations of the past. And we get this kind of objective versus subjective dichotomy going on. We can go speed all the way to 2007, talking about how the development of radiocarbon dating caused a communication gap between archaeologists trained in the humanities and archaeological scientists trained in the natural sciences. And Weiner at this time is saying this can be resolved, great, by educating a new generation of archaeologists who are familiar with both and are thus able to formulate and interpret their own projects based on the field as well as laboratory observations. Great. I think this has definitely happened to an extent. Lots of people know about radiocarbon dating, but I do think because of the advances we've been doing and how niche some of the techniques we are using, obviously not everyone's going to understand everything. So this still hasn't really fixed the problem, even though there is definitely more knowledge about the science going on. The next paper that I kind of want to talk about in our journey is from 2014, Christensen, and talking about the third science revolution in archaeology. And I would say Christensen is one of the archaeologists most emphatic about the science side. What is the third science revolution? The first revolution was kind of actually the formation of archaeology itself as an independent scientific discipline, systematic data collection, methodological ordering of data, and all that. Then he says that there's a second revolution, very similar to what Snow was talking about, the breakthrough of nuclear power, radiocarbon dating, which he argues paves a way for a reorientation of archaeological interpretations and bringing in these new methods from biology and chemistry and geography and that kind of stuff. So then finally, we have the third science revolution, which happened pretty much in this millennium. This is kind of the formation of next generation sequencing for ancient DNA and other biomolecular methods that can generate big data. And this big data is important because it can also do modeling. So there's kind of like these leaps in technology that have been happening. And he does not diminish archaeological theory in this, but quote says, a new door has been opened to previously hidden absolute knowledge that once again will reduce the amount of qualified guessing and thus both refine and redefine theory and interpretation. And from this quote, it kind of feels like science is the side that is driving the car in this. It's the one redefining the theory, which I think it definitely has a part in, but obviously not all archaeologists agree with that. And so has been a lot of debate since then. This is just one of them, referencing the two cultures again, of course. And Sørensen here, which is a few years after Christensen's, shows the pendulum moving between the science and humanities sides and trying to figure this out. And I think he shows an interesting point of view, and one that I've heard a lot from archaeologists, that arguing that the discipline, so archaeology's grounding in the humanities, is at stake, and that the notion of interdisciplinarity is becoming distorted with the increasing fetishization of data, facts, and quantitative methods. And this is something I've heard a lot, is that the kind of data, the science side, is kind of put up on a pedestal of because it's, quote, objective, that it is more true and it has more value. He does end with this quote that I think we all agree with, that science and the humanities are indeed united by sharing the fundamental capacity for curiosity. They will potentially arrive at different answers, but nevertheless, they're equally valid. And I do think this summarizes the desire of archaeologists in this debate, this want for equality in this communication between the two sides that is not being felt. And it's this lack of communication. And I specifically said they're the desire of archaeologists in this debate because I would say that these complaints aren't usually coming from the science side. I do want to highlight that the call for better communication tend to come from the archaeology side. And there's a lot of other papers in this debate, and I don't have time to go into them. These are a few I recommend trying to look up a bit more. But I also want to say that in general, there has recently been more of a pushback by archaeologists to try and reinterpret data in more holistic ways. So this is an example recently from UCD that where they're reevaluating ancient DNA data and talking about kinship, and they are really arguing that the results of, they say of ancient DNA, but I think it applies to all of this, is the results need to be fully contextualized with information from material culture, architecture, the settlement record, and the human body, taking into account the theoretical frameworks underpinning the discipline of archaeology today. So you can see here it's taking into account versus changing the theory. And I also think, yeah, this is important because if we don't have very good communication, this can't really happen. And I do think that this is important. So I do think all of this brief, really quick traipse through a theory and discussion is showing that we're kind of stuck in this cycle, that it's not changing. And especially maybe the science side isn't changing. And I know that's not necessarily true. And I do think a lot has changed, but it kind of feels like that's the side that's not really acknowledging this problem as much. But I think the fact that it is a cycle where it's like, hey, science, and hey, like it just is showing that there's not this dialogue, that it's just kind of this one-way conversation. And so it's this breakdown in communication. And I think archaeological scientists, us in this middle ground where we have the two sides and we see each other more often and we can do this, we can try to have this more of a dialogue. I know this is lofty, but I think there's merit to thinking more about it right now. So especially today. And so here we are today. Surprise, this isn't just a lecture. I do have some data. I am trying to go really fast because we started late. So I did a little small survey of fellow colleagues at UCD and a few field archaeologists I know. There's not that many respondents. I think it was 17. I know that's not representative, but I do think it can highlight some of my points and be a jumping off ground for discussion. So I'm going to blaze through this and maybe we can go back if we want to talk about it. I asked for just a general understanding, what stage of research are you in? Most of them are grad students, probably because they know me much closer and I can bully them into doing a survey easier. But we have a range, and I have some field archaeologists, some professors, lecturers, etc. Maybe for time, I will skip this one. I was going to ask you guys if you think archaeological scientists are good at communicating, but because of time, I will go straight into what they said. I'd say we're getting, we're passing grade. I'd say we're about 3.5 out of 5. And lots of people have problems with communication, obviously. So I do think that we can improve on this, obviously. I did ask, do you work with archaeological scientists, just to see where people are coming from? And yes, and also there are some people who have identified as archaeological scientists in the survey. And this is because I said I defined it as a person who actively and routinely engages in the scientific analysis of archaeological samples. So, for example, microscope or laboratory analysis and raw chemical data analysis or bioinformatics. And there are quite a few people who use who do microscope analysis in the department. So I think these are some of them. Not that that is diminishing their opinion or changing how we think about it, but it is, of course, a different science to us. In theory, and then I said, do you think there is enough communication between these two sides? And only one person said yes. So obviously this is really highlighting that there is this communication gap. I asked them, what do you think archaeological scientists need to improve in terms of communication? The highest one was something that we've seen a lot already, is that not appreciative of the archaeological framework. That was the highest. Next one was actually being upfront about requirements. So sample size, destructiveness, time required. After that, we have the two detail problems. We're either don't have enough detail or we're too detailed. Then it's actually letting you know what techniques are available that apparently we can improve on, which makes sense. We're getting new techniques all the time. Unfortunately, a couple people said there was condescending communication, which isn't great. I'm glad it's not the majority, but I do think that happens. And someone also wrote in that we have a lack of helpful visual material. I'm assuming that means for presentations. And this kind of leads in then to my question where I asked, do you feel like you are on an equal footing with archaeological scientists in terms of interpretation? And lots of people said no or maybe. And I think that is part of the debate that I was talking about, was that there is a lot of times the science is the empirical evidence, it is more true. It can provide more to the debate sometimes. Or at least people of doing more subjective analysis feel like they don't have as much to stand on potentially. So why you've probably been going Meaghan, you said this was relevant for ancient protein studies. It is, it really is. So why is it important for paleoproteomics? There's two main reasons. The first one, we are like comparatively a newer field. We've only kind of been going around for 20 years or so. At least, well, LC, that's the more LCMS kind of stuff, but it's still comparatively new. We don't have like the same background as isotopes or radiocarbon dating. So we do have some ground to make up. And then also, I think proteomics is just less conceptually obvious than some of the other archaeological science techniques. So, especially so ancient DNA, people have seen Jurassic Park or CSI, or they kind of understand the DNA bit a bit more. It's also just kind of one thing, whereas there's so many different kinds of proteins and they can do different things. Lots of people were probably asked, what is a protein? So this is something that I feel like that we do have to overcome. And because it is a bit more complicated, we as a group have to be better at communicating what we do. I think also for time, how are we doing? Yeah, also for time, I will skip this next question for your opinion, but I also asked them about paleoproteomics and what techniques they're familiar with. And so first I just asked which of these techniques are people familiar? Of course, people are familiar with radiocarbon dating and stable isotopes. They're kind of the workhorse of um, oh, people keep coming in. I don't know if like the time was wrong, but anyway. So yeah, radiocarbon dating and stable isotopes, of course, people know, and then ancient DNA, lipids, also doing pretty well. Lots of people do know about, well, I say lots. Half of the people know about paleoproteomics, have some kind of understanding of it, which is kind of annoying because lots of them know me. So maybe I haven't been communicating myself well enough. I threw in RNA for fun. A couple people know it, but otherwise that's the thing. But then I asked, which are you the most confident in of these? And of course, radiocarbon dating is up there, stable isotopes. 4 people said none of them, even though they know about them, they couldn't pick one that they were more confident in. And unfortunately, paleoproteomics down at the bottom, which is not surprising for the people that I asked because no one else is doing it there. But it is something like people just don't necessarily have an awareness of it just from being in a department. And these are mostly people doing archaeological research. So I would think that they maybe know a little bit more, but obviously, as I said, we're still new. There's still lots of things. So specifically regarding proteomics or ancient protein sequencing, I asked people which applications they've heard of. Of course, Zoom's is highest. That's we don't know why. And then people have heard of LCMS to an extent, said applications. I kind of branched out and gave different like purposes. So detection of pathogens. There again, annoying, like 2 people said they didn't know any applications, which is, they know me. So yeah, we'll think about that. 2 people knew about amelogenin sexing, which I was kind of surprised. It's kind of like a hot topic right now. And one person also surprised me that they had heard about using PTMs. Just a little side thing at the end there. I also asked which kind of samples have you heard about using paleoproteomics, and unsurprisingly, bones, teeth, skin, dental calculus way up there as well. Maybe that one is my influence. Surprisingly, no one has heard about shells, which is surprising, me being in Turin. And one person had not heard about any of this somehow still. And so, yeah, the point of that is that I feel like we have some ground to make up. And maybe I am too deep in here, but I think paleoproteomics is so cool. And It can do so many cool things to understand the people and how they lived in the past. And we just need to get better at communicating it and realizing the difficulties that we have and trying to work on that. And so what can we do? As I said about the assumptions of knowledge, the easy one is being more upfront about the requirements and also what proteomics can do, just providing more information. We need to figure out a Goldilocks level of detail, not too much, not too little. In the comment section where people could suggest things, they suggested in like conferences and stuff, concise 1 to 2 minute explanations of the technique. So, which of course I think we all know about, but I do want to emphasize that it says 1 to 2 minute there. So it's paring things down to the information that is needed to understand what you are saying, and not more, so that the other stuff can be followed up later, right? Remind ourselves that there is more than one way of knowing and remind colleagues about this, which leads us into the assumptions of importance, which is where I got most of the comments, talking about one side or the other being more important. So we had people saying that they wonder how seriously this will be taken if the hard science side doesn't believe that there is a problem, which is kind of one of the reasons why maybe this and also ISBA, we can maybe try to work on this. We had someone say that they feel archaeological scientists don't see the value of integrating their data with other lines of inquiry. And if they can recognize the value of deep contextual analyses, perhaps this will make scientists more eager to make their ideas more digestible. So if we have, that also kind of feels like as archaeologists, we also have to like promote the cool things about archaeology. And I also have to say this is on both sides. So there was a comment that did say in my experience that archaeologists can be condescending to archaeological scientists, presuming that the scientist doesn't really understand the complexity of archaeology. So there's quite a lot of gatekeeping, apparently, according to this person, which I can't say I have experienced, but I'm sure some of you have. And so we have to remember that on both sides, we have to try and be open. And it reminded me of a quote from a book that has nothing to do with this. But the quote that I saved for myself, hence why there's no page number, was that the woman in front of you in line who just screamed at you is maybe not usually like this. Maybe she's going through a rough time. Whether this is actually true isn't the point. Just considering the possibility makes room for the lived realities of other people whose depths are the same as your own. And I do think that's important just in life, but I want to rephrase it for what we should be doing. And I do think that we need to remember to make room for the equally deep realities of the scientific and humanistic sides of archaeology. I do like one person can't do this, but I just want us all as a way to even like make communication easier is to try and keep a space in our mind open for this other side or both sides, wherever you're coming from, to just try to like remember that not to have one side take all the air in the conversation. And finally, easy, probably the most practical thing we can do is have more time to connect. So we want to find places where we can explain the relevance of the method, have more places to enable collaboration. Someone suggested in the comments to run archaeological science and archaeology fieldwork / theory workshops, where the first half of the day, one side would stand up and say what they do and what they need and what they can't do, and then flip it. I know this can be hard to do. I said there's a lot of physical separation, but at least Zoom has made this a little bit more feasible. You're showing up to this today. And I do think it's good to branch out to other groups. So I would say archaeological institutes, for example, can also be very helpful. For example, the Institute of Irish Archaeologists fairly frequently run professional development days like this, that connect people from the field and experts and try to give them a little bit more training. And I do think that if we all try to put a little bit more effort into this, I can't right now, I'm going into my last year, my PhD, otherwise I would, but that's why I'm talking to you. But we could even maybe try to include it in grants or something like that, maybe. But yeah, so that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you guys. And I know probably a lot of this was not new to you. But I do think that this obvious cycle that we're stuck in, that things are not really improving as much as as it should be. And I think every time it's brought up, maybe we take a little bit of a step. So yeah, I'm in the little time we've left, we started late. I want to throw it to you all, and you've heard me rambling, so I'd love to have a little bit of discussion about how you think we can improve. Thanks.